Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you made time this time of the day to join us for the tea with ASTP. The topic today is intellectual assets management. And I will start with brief introduction of myself. My name is Hana Kosova. I am here today on behalf of ASTP EU Committee, but I will just briefly let you know about my background, which can be also one element in the topic I'll be talking about today. I actually studied law and linguistics and also had the privilege to take some of professional trainings like project management or a diplomatic academy, and I also have tiny bit of life science background. So I always try to combine all this experience in my professional life, and I was jumping in between different sectors, which is also quite an interesting element, provided the shift in technology and knowledge transfer to knowledge valorization, and I will talk about this later. I've got experience from private sector, from some project program management and consultancy, and also working in public-private partnerships. I also worked for Ministry of Foreign Affairs, therefore some public administration experience and international organizations like United Nations Development Program, which leads a little bit to the non-governmental organizations and some kind of charity organizations as well. And I've been working freelance for a long time, both in the Czech Republic, which is my home country, as well as abroad in the United Kingdom, in Western Balkans, as well as in Africa, in Malawi. So you can see that these environments are quite different, but sometimes there are some synergies and analogies you find everywhere. And the main link, I would say, is the using different languages and tongues, you can say. And you need always to make sure that the messages are understood the way you meant them to be understood and sent across. So not just talk, but listen as well. That's I will leave some space at the end for some dialogue and discussion with you as well. With regard to the topic itself, I served as a rapporteur to the European Commission for the mutual learning exercise on the topic of knowledge valorization. I was for 10 years director of the Knowledge and Technology Transfer Office of Charles University in Prague in the Czech Republic. And currently I work with a known biotech research institute here in Prague, which is called Institute of Organic Chemistry and Biochemistry. This is where the IOCB abbreviations come from. And there is the whole ecosystem around this institute called IOCB Tech Group. At the same time, I still try to keep some space empty for knowledge valorization consultancy to keep in touch with the whole European community, which is an interesting element. And therefore, I managed to pick bits and pieces along the way to talk about intellectual assets management and current status of this topic all across the EU and beyond a little bit. Today, I will start with some context introduction before I jump into the very detail of what we found out as part of survey done as part of the IM4RE project. You can see the logo on the slides as well on my kind of background screen. I guess most of you have heard already about knowledge valorization, the new buzzword, as some people say. Some people find a more noble way how to call it. They call it the new paradigm of interactions between academic research, companies, businesses, as well as public administration and the civil society. This term came with a set of European documents in 2022. So already some time ago. It will be almost exactly 3 years in 2 weeks' time when the main guiding principles document was adopted. And basically what it did, it extended the understanding of hidden knowledge and highlighted it as more as a value which goes beyond the traditional understanding of intellectual property. So it goes beyond this, and we now talk about intellectual assets. You will find the technical definitions of the terminology in one of the adjoining documents to the guiding principles, which is called Code of Practice on Intellectual Assets. I believe you will receive this presentation afterwards, so there are all the links in case you would be interested in reading the details. But basically, intellectual assets, for those of you who are not sure what's the difference between intellectual property rights, etc., intellectual assets work as an umbrella definition which basically covers any results or products generated by research and innovation activities. Then you can have intellectual property, which is like a subgroup of the assets. And these are things which are eligible for some formal legal protection and can involve things like inventions, which can be protected by patents, for example, or literary and artistic works, images, designs, things you probably know from your national legislative environments. And intellectual property rights are actually the protection you can apply when applying for patent or trademark or protected design and many other things which I will not list here, and they may differ country from country. There are also some pan-European schemes how to get these rights protected, and I won't be going into any detail here. I just wanted to point out that the new terminology and what we'll be talking about today is the point of view of the umbrella intellectual assets overview. And why is it so important to talk about intellectual assets and their management? I will now do a small historic linguistic diversion. And it is quite an interesting story about the word asset itself, because in Middle and Old English and French, it was a legal term which actually meant there is enough of something. The word assez, based on French and Latin, meant enough. There is enough resources, and according to the Oxford English Dictionary, it also means any useful thing or something that holds value. And we get back a little bit to the term or knowledge valorization, because value is the center of everything. Value is something what can't be completely neglected, because if you do, it loses the value. It simply does not exist anymore if you don't take care of it or manage it in some reasonable way. And this leads to due diligence responsibilities of especially public research organizations, management, professionals working in the field of knowledge and technology transfer, be it kind of public research institution, university, and many other entities as well. But we should not forget that if there is something floating in the air which is of a value, we need to identify it, we need to recognize it, and we need to ideally find ways how to improve the value, how to take care of it, and how to find the best use of this asset. So this was just a diversion, what it means, the word, and how it generated in English, which I think is fully relevant for the modern term in the context of intellectual assets. Another comment to start with is why we talk intellectual assets and knowledge valorization at all now, because you probably know about the many reports, starting with Draghi report, and many similar documents followed, which I would say that they admit the need for something I call survival strategy of the European Union, of the European continent, of this kind of geographical space, because they admit that there is a lot of competition globally. There is a lot of new threats and context with regard to AI, geopolitical situation. We talk a lot about research security and integrity. You can add some export limitations, dual use technology sanctions list. All these form the space, and some people see that these aspects may limit the space for innovation, new inventions, new solutions. And this is partially why the European Council adopted the guiding principles for knowledge valorization in December 2022. And they focus a lot on the need to co-create, to find new solutions in collaborations. There is talk about quadruple helix, which means basically collaboration of academic entities, private companies, together with public authorities, as well as civil society, citizens, non-governmental organizations, and other entities which can represent civil society. So you need to join forces to get somewhere and get some progress. And since the guiding principles document is quite broad, it is linked to more practical codes of practice, which actually focus on intellectual assets management, on collaborations between academic and commercial entities, also on the topic of standardization. And there is more coming, more under preparation. All these documents are co-created by a community of practice, community of people who actually work in the field. And there is usually an open call to join in, comment on the progress of the document. So we can't really say this is something imposed by European Commission on the community, like top down. There are people, I believe, also in the audience here today who were part of this process. So if there is something completely wrong, we can blame ourselves and we can try to find ways how to make it better and more practical. Because all the previous legal documents are becoming obsolete in the context of the current need to kind of find solutions flexible enough, being sustainable and usable from the practical point of view. The traditional definition of technology transfer is not enough anymore because you've got more elements coming into the process, the needs for social innovations as well, many other points of view, and there might be some collisions with the traditional approaches also with legislation, public aid, and competition laws, etc. So this is just setting the scene why all this is happening. There is a list of documents which I see as relevant for the policy and legal background for the topic of intellectual assets management and standardization as well. I already mentioned a couple of times the guiding principles 2022. The timing is also quite important because we need to remind ourselves that we are now 3 years on time of the adoption of this document. It was by the codes of practice. In 23, intellectual assets management, standardization. Also, there are some more recent documents coming into the overall picture, which is, for example, the European Competitiveness Compass. You may notice the closure of the public consultation on the European Innovation Act. I think last week the consultation was closed. So there will be more things coming. And there are also some synergies of the topic I will be talking about today with the RM Research Management Competence Framework document, as well as some of the existing training and certification schemes in the context of knowledge and technology transfer. Recognized technology transfer professional certification is definitely the top one from the point of view of relevancy to this. Because we'll be talking about training needs, about people, and about what's going on in around us based on some data set we managed to get from our community. I'll now set it in the context of the IM4RE project. The abbreviation stands for Intellectual Assets Management for Research and Entrepreneurship. It's a long name of a European funded project, which is still ongoing. And basically, it should find new ways how to boost entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship mindset in research community. Besides other things, by improving intellectual asset valorization and standardization in public research organizations and academic institutions. And the main aim is to find some new training schemes and some new tools which would support the level of entrepreneurship in, I would say, academic research community. ASTP, the partners of this project, and we should be able to assess the current level of awareness and practices in knowledge valorization as well as in standardization. Interesting combination of topics. And we should identify the gaps in capacity building and training schemes, and also their alignment with the previously mentioned codes of practice of the EU, because it's underlined by the principle that skilled people are actually one of the core assets we all work with. If you work in any research environment, I guess most of you are probably from the public research institutions, but this applies also to private R&D environments. Skilled people and well-trained people, you don't get anywhere. So we can talk a lot about AI and some artificial tools, which are just tools, but the inventions, the new solutions will always come from people's heads. So we need to focus on people a lot. But we need some data to work with. So as ASTP, we were approached within the IM4RE project to provide some data set which would serve as baseline for development of further trainings, guidelines, and tools, which we actually did. How we did it. We opened an online survey. It was open for a couple of months between May and July this year. And I would like to again thank to our colleagues. Maybe some of you are present here today that participated, because in the end we were quite successful in getting 66 responses from individual people representing actually 65 institutions from all across Europe. We also had a couple of answers from the United Kingdom, from Turkey, Switzerland, Serbia, and even Oman. and the respondees were coming from mix of different environments. It was a mix of universities, public research organizations, so different institutes of academies of sciences, for example, as well as people from a spin-off and startup environment. We used descriptive statistics and thematic coding of open responses, and the answers were quite interesting, provided that we are asking about topics which have been here for 3 years almost at the time of opening of the survey. And when asking about the general level of awareness about knowledge valorization principles, it was still medium. You can see the average figure, so it was 3.5 out of 5 as the maximum awareness, and this scale is used for most of the questions. So 1 is the lowest one, 5 is the highest mark. And we found out that the knowledge valorization activities are happening. So there is quite a lot of spin-off activity, licensing, partnerships with industry partners, but these are often happening in some ad hoc ways, and they are not embedded almost at all in any long-term systematic institutional strategy supporting knowledge valorization. So this is one of an interesting points that still 3 years on, not much has changed actually. Sorry. Here you can see the graphs and its combination of the individual, the respondee's self-awareness of the topic and the options, as well as the reported engagement of their institution in official kind of engagement in these activities. And here are a few like comments from the open questions if people are willing to provide examples of types of these activities. You can see that partnerships with industry are winning the chart, followed by some participation in innovation networks, licensing agreements, followed by some other types of partnerships, advisory services, consultancy, and creation of spin-offs or startups. Very different story is the chapter of standardization. Standardization, as mentioned in the Code of Practice, is seen by European Commission as another tool useful for enhancing knowledge valorization, but not so much understood apparently, because the awareness of how to use standardization to get better results when attempting to valorize your research results is much lower. It was 2.5 out of 5. And only 44 respondents admitted any link with any formal strategy they would be aware of. And it seemed that it's mostly perceived as something very technical, sector specific, and it's not integrated almost at all into some general kind of workflow of research results leading into some innovative solutions. And incentives are very limited how to get more people involved in standardization activities, and it's not reflected very much in monitoring schemes or research results and kind of knowledge and technology transfer evaluation schemes as well. And we also asked about the existing training schemes and about capacity building needs for the future. Most of the answers mentioned different types of existing more technology transfer training schemes dealing with the traditional topics like intellectual property, asset identification, like scouting for new ideas. Some focus on entrepreneurship support, but many respondents admitted that these schemes are not fully relevant in the context of knowledge valorization, so they are slightly outdated, or they are not aligned with the intellectual assets management principles, so the wider concept of intellectual assets I described at the beginning. For standardization, again, the story is very short and very limited training is currently available. Therefore, the demand for kind of case-based learning, having some good practice examples. Many respondents also mentioned that the best way how to do it should be to integrate the new principles, new training approaches into PhD curricula. That we should focus on train-the-trainer models to be fast enough to reach widest audience possible, combined with some online modules and MOOCs and other similar tools. Here is again a graph based on the results of the survey, which is ranked by kind of priority, what's needed by respondents. And definitely there is big or highest demand for guidance on standardization processes in the context of knowledge valorization, intellectual assets management, codes of practice, etc. Some mentioned also the access to training program, that there is not enough, probably. And the topic of standardization is also occupying the third place, that they need more networking with standardization bodies and maybe the networks dealing with topics in general. Another interesting, but it depends whether interesting is the correct word, how to describe it, is the context of the codes of practice, which were actually meant as more practical manuals how to implement into practical professional level the new principles of intellectual asset management and standardization. There is still very limited awareness to the respondents of the existence of these documents and of their content and the kind of practical usage, and very low adoption or integration into the institutional strategies. It seems that the main barriers is that people simply don't know about it. Lack of awareness is the more diplomatic way how to describe it. And apparently there is not enough incentives at the national level how to make people more interested in this topic, how to motivate people to get involved and integrate these principles into their day jobs and routines at academic research institutions. It might be because of competing priorities and constraints as well. So maybe the systems focus on the more traditional outputs of research, like publications, instead of being actively involved in designing new standards or trying to include the wider approach of intellectual assets management, like working with know-how and tacit knowledge and other more kind of vague forms of knowledge, which could and should be valorized as well. The conclusions based on the survey results, we would say that the kind of landscape for knowledge valorization in European countries mostly is relatively mature, but still lacks more systematic implementation. So the practical implementation is still quite fragmented. the topic of standardization still requires much more awareness raising and is poorly integrated into strategies and still underdeveloped in many institutions. There is still surprisingly low level of awareness of the EU codes of practice, and there were several demands for even more simplified and practical guidance based on the content of codes of practice. We will now try to feed the results from the survey into the design of future IM4RE project training suite and MOOCs, as well as policy guidelines. And we think that the final project results, which are to come in, I think, 18 months' time, should be reflected by training providers in the field of intellectual assets management, kind of knowledge and technology transfer and valorization. This applies to ASTP as well as to policy makers at different levels, starting from the individual research institution, going to regional, national, and even European level. And here is the list of key recommendations. We will aim as part of the project to develop some modular training on these topics, and it should serve as a menu where different institutions, even individuals, could select what they need to fill in their personal or institutional gaps. So basically, one size does not fit all, and everyone can customize it as needed. The aim is to create some simplified guide before, and also try to connect the two topics together and embed the topic of standardization as a regular and necessary part of intellectual assets management processes. Standardization should not be seen as a silo activity because it wouldn't make sense, and this approach is more promotion of the knowledge and technology transfer professional community as well, and see the potential combining both. And on the practical level, the project, but not only the project, but all the individual partners to it, including ASTP, will try to put together and should try to put together some toolkits for the research institutions and schemes of possible peer learning, some opportunities, exchanging case studies, webinars, and maybe set new communities of practice. I think there is good base in ASTP member community and other similar organizations. So there is something definitely to build on. It's not fully, but we need to keep improving and try to ways how to do it. ASTP's perspective, what is happening now or has happened very recently is that we provided the results of the survey were shared with ASTP EU committee as well as professional development committee of ASTP. Especially our kind of PDC colleagues are looking into ways how to find capacities to adopt some of the coming outputs from this and other European funded projects where STP is involved into possibly some new training schemes or updating some of the existing ones. ASTP is able to finalize some policy guidelines which should be coming as part of the project deliverable for the IM4RE. And we also want to be still actively involved in the design of new training schemes and toolkits. What's important also is to continue to be actively to the wider stakeholder community in CNAC, which stands for National Associations Advisory Committee, which is a very interesting and useful community of practitioners which goes beyond the ASTP leadership. So it's work with the national associations or informal national networks. And basically, ASTP needs to remain flexible and open, keep listening to the feedback from the user community, which equals to community of knowledge and technology transfer professionals. So I will stop here. I think there is just one slide providing key links which might be useful for some further reference, and my contact details as well. These will be shared after today. Thank you very much for the patience for listening to me, and I think we are coming to the Q&A section, so questions and hopefully some answers as well. I'm stopping to share the screen, and I don't know if we've got any questions from the audience right now.
Hannah, would you mind trying to quickly switch on and off your camera? It seems to have disconnected quickly while we wait for a few questions to come up in the chat. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm back.
You
Yeah,
definitely
I noticed I was frozen, so apologies to everyone for this kind
no
of
problem.
funny face, but it happens.
Yeah, it happens. So thank you very much for giving the presentation. Yeah, please, if you have any questions, please submit it in the Q&A chat, and I would be happy to place them onto the screen for Hannah to answer them. Otherwise, everyone can enjoy their evening, and thank you for attending the webinar. We'll wait 2 minutes or so, and then we'll see if any questions come through. I would also like to add that Hannah has allowed me to share the presentation with you guys. So this will also be shared with you after the webinar, together with the recording on the website for the members of ASTP. Okay, I don't see any questions coming through. So I would like to wish everyone a great evening. And oh, I see one. One moment. I'm going to show it on stage.
Yeah, how do you honor academic researchers for generating a spin-off based on their inventions? Usually they are, and maybe there should be more written down. But yeah, feel free, please, John, to add if you wanted to add anything. But yeah, honored for publications and funded projects. Actually, this depends from the research we did as part of the survey, as well as what I have seen as part of the mutual learning exercise. Often there is a tool embedded in institutional rules or national legislation to somehow honor or kind of provide benefits to researchers, academic in so there are which are not being used, and it simply needs more talking to the management, and some countries try to embed these incentives, either financial or maybe also with regard to academic progress of these people, to reflect these options of there might be some mobility schemes in some countries. I know about Austria, for example, that people who are active in spin-off or startup creation can jump back and forth between the business environment and academic environment. There are ways how to do it, but it requires some level of risk taking and bravery from the management of the institution where this person works. And how academic progress is stimulated when changing spin-off, I think it can give you completely different perspective. And definitely if you work with a specific product, which is usually the reason why you set up a spin-off company, you definitely are aiming to get some user perspective, and it can feedback with more kind of data, practical feedback, how it works, how it doesn't work, and give you many more ideas how to expand your research activities as well. So I think can have many different roles, and these are underestimated sometimes, but before people actually try it in practice, they don't know. So we should encourage our academics and researchers to be more brave and try more spin-off activities and get the feedback which would feed back into their research activities as well. So I hope this is enough for the answer.
Yes. Okay. So for now, that seems to be the only comments slash questions that we have at the moment. So please feel free to post any last minute questions that you can think of. Otherwise, I will thank everyone for coming, and I'll thank Hannah for presenting everything for us. And I wish everyone absolutely fantastic evening, and I'll see you at the next tea.